Hello everybody and welcome to this GameStorm EDU session on remixing games. This is brought to you by GameStorm EDU. You can go to GameStormEDU.com for more information on everything you hear today. And I am going to recommend for today's session, you're going to want the Game Designer template. This template allows you to try out all the things we're talking about today. So if you need to, go ahead and pause this video, head to GameStormEDU.com, and then head to the Resources for Finding Games tab, where you can get a copy of this workbook for free. All right, so today we're talking about remixing a game. And really when you think about remixing a game, what we're really doing is changing the verbs of the game, right? It's all the things that you can do or the rules of the game that navigate, what allows you to progress, the objective of the game, how the game operates. So a remix of a game is a really great way to practice your game design skills. It's really hard to just hop into making an original game. So sometimes changing the mechanics of a game is a really easy way to do that. And the best way is to think about what are the verbs of the game and how can I mess with those verbs. So let's think of some examples of remixing a game. So an example of a game remix, actually, if you go to GameStorm EDU, is the game 5-Minute Compound Chaos. It is a remix of the game 5-Minute Dungeon, changing some of the rules of the game. For example, instead of trying to combine different symbols to defeat enemies, you're trying to combine different compounds to make, creating different elements together to make compounds. Another example of a remix is the game Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. And on GameStorm EDU, there's a game called Knights of the Numeracy Table, where you're actually, instead of combining cards together to defeat, some of the evil members of Voldemort's gang, you're trying to combine numbers together using weapons to defeat monsters on the board. And then in the forthcoming game, GameStormers from GameStorm EDU, it has an inspiration from the rules of Magic the Gathering. So in that game, you're using different card types to defeat your enemy. And in GameStormers, you're actually using different card types to build your own game. So that would be an example of taking those rules of trying to defeat someone, instead saying we're actually trying to make a better game than them. So a really great way to practice this, either yourself or if you're doing game storming with some students or friends, family, faculty, staff, whatever it might be, is to offer 3 different very common games for them to practice with. So 3 games I like to use are tic-tac-toe, checkers, or chess. And the examples I'll use today, it'll be chess, but any of these 3 games would work. And maybe if you're working with younger participants, tic-tac-toe would be more appropriate. Or if you're working with slightly older participants, checkers or chess might be good, or offer all 3 and group them up to discuss how they might remix these different games. So to kind of give you an idea of what the prompt would be, we'd want to think about how can we adapt the rules or mechanics of these games to be different. So another thing you can do right now is actually pause this recording and brainstorm in your GameStorm EDU designer workbook a few ways you might change one of these 3 games. So I'll allow you to take a second to do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some opportunities for remixing. A lot of times when I bring up this topic of remixing, these are some of the ideas that come out for all of the games, tic-tac-toe, checkers, or chess. What if in any of the 3, you added another player? So now there's a dynamic of not only do I need to plan and anticipate what one person's doing, but what about that 3rd or 4th player we've added? How would that change the game? That's a really clever remix that totally changes the landscape of how you might strategize, right? What if I changed how the pieces could move? In checkers and chess, the pieces can only move a certain way. What if I change that? Tic-tac-toe, what if I changed, the different ways that I can place? Maybe I can place multiple if I do something specific, right? So that's one way to think about it. An example of a remix of a game would be this example from Dr. Micah Shippey's social studies class, where their students took Monopoly and they actually changed the rules to be less about properties, and instead more about different battles in World War I. Another way to think about, the act of changing those verbs or changing the mechanics of a game is what would happen if you changed the actual play space of the game or changed the board? How would changing that mechanic, how you're allowed to move or where you're allowed to move, how would that change the game as well? And if we think about that example, this is a very popular way to remix a game. So look at the example of chess. Chess has been remixed in terms of its play space many different times. You can see on the left, there is a cube-shaped board where you can move around this three-dimensional cube rather than a two-dimensional board. Or maybe the board has different levels to it now, as you can see in the middle example, or the right example where there's different elevations to the board, and maybe certain pieces can't move too much of one elevation, so to speak. So this is another way to think about how can I change or manipulate that game to make it a new experience. This is a great way to dip your toe in the waters of game design without having to go all in on it, right? Some examples here of some remixing of the play space. This is an example of somebody taking the game Stratego and remixing it to fit World War I. And instead of those players being able to go everywhere, maybe there's some terrain that changes their strategy, or maybe there is some gas that has infected the playfield that affects people's ability to move. So these are all pieces of information that help you envision remixing, and it's a great intro activity to game design. Again, if you have any questions, head to GameStormEDU.com and check out the resources there about game remixing.